I'm Kyle.
And this is Co-Immunity Chronic Ills. Today we are here with Carmen and we're going to be talking about medical gaslighting. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Carmen.
Hi, yeah. So CarmenRose, pronouns she, her. I'm never good at the elevator speech. Living with chronic migraine, post-concussion syndrome, some neurodivergence, and just woo, I know, right? Let's get off topic. And just a queer Latina disabled activist. And excited to talk about medical gaslighting today.
So obviously you're very passionate about all things accessibility. How does medical gaslighting kind of fall into accessibility to care and how you receive treatment?
Yeah, so medical gaslighting is honestly the reason it took me 3 years to get care, because I got 3 summers ago, I got 2 concussions within a month of each other. And the interesting thing about concussions is a lot of times you just have to wait for stuff to go away. And, that does work for a lot of people. Like they wouldn't say if it didn't work for a lot of people. But I was one of those rare cases where I ended up with post-concussion syndrome, and they can't really diagnose that until you're like 6 to 9 months out. So the first 6 to 9 months were frustrating because I was just waiting for my symptoms to go away. And I'd heard so many people say like, oh yeah, just like give it a month. And you see like NFL players like go back the next week, which I'm like, that's a whole other episode. But I think there's this standard of like, concussion stuff goes away pretty quickly, or, it's at least like you can get back to it after a couple of weeks. And I was just really struggling. I had to take a term off of school. And it was really minor stuff. It kind of took me a while to notice, like sensitivity to light and other stuff that's not like, oh, I'm bruised, or like the bone hasn't healed yet, like stuff that you can't like physically see and be like, that's going to take 2 weeks and then you're healed, right? It's like your brain and stuff we couldn't see. And so I just kept getting told like, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. Your memories are going to come back. It'll, the symptoms that are bad will get better. And so then I was like at the 9 month, almost a year mark, realizing like these are not going away. And then, we sort of hit the pandemic and everything. I think it was so exhausting to live with a condition, let alone like, oh, I can't research another doctor and wait and waste all this energy just to get gaslit again. Like it really deterred me from wanting to see help. Cause I'm like, well, I don't like want to waste my time. So it wasn't until I honestly didn't realize it was so bad. Like I gaslit myself so hard that when I finally realized that, because I was like, doesn't everyone wake up with a little headache, and then you drink water and you drink coffee and it goes away?
A little headache?
Yeah, because I was just like, when you drink water and have a coffee, like then it goes away. So sometimes I wouldn't even count that as a migraine day. Because I'm like, oh, it's just the morning one. And I remember talking to my primary care doctor and she was like, how often do you get headaches? And I was like, oh, I don't know, like 10 times a month. And she was like, yeah, no. And I was like, you mean everyone doesn't get that? Like we're not all just, so I had been like gaslighting myself that I'm like, just pop some Advil, whatever. And it wasn't until she was like, yeah, that's not normal. And so I finally went and saw a neurologist over this past summer. And it took me like a couple weeks of researching her and calling. And I made sure to find a woman of color so that I just felt like somebody that really understood me. And it was the best decision ever, because having somebody that can relate to you and you just feel comfortable with, like whatever, if they have the same identities as you or not, it's just like as long as you feel comfortable. And it's like you still have those moments in the appointment where I'm like, oh, that's like I remember my first appointment, she was like, is that everything? And I was like, yeah. And I remember being like, she was like, okay, cool. And because I'm like, I'm sure you're great with all your patients, so you're used to it, but I'm sitting there like, yeah, that's it. That's everything. You answer all my questions. She's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, whoa. So it really was like medical gaslighting is what took me so long to get care and think that I was like worthy of care, right? Because it's like there's medical gaslighting and then self-gaslighting. So it really drove me to where I am today, honestly.
And then, all of that's compounded by your peers.
Totally. Oh, just take an Advil. Oh, just, it's just a headache.
I get headaches too.
Yeah.
And it's
Have
so
you tried
easy.
Advil? And I'm like,
or essential oils, or cutting out gluten.
Yeah. No, I think it's so easy, especially, after living with it for 9 months, it's so easy to be like, oh, this is just normal. And,
right, it's the normal.
You couldn't do anything for 9 months about it. So, you just kind of lived with it. And I think, I know it, like, especially my own history, I guess, like you kind of just can't see how it was before. Like you don't remember how it felt to, not have headaches or being tired, just being awake all day,
Right.
it's some like
It's like your
simple
recent
things
memory
like
is
that.
just being injured. So you're like, I don't even remember what that was like. So it's
Right.
always been like this.
Well, I think people can relate to it better now because we have COVID. It's like,
Yeah.
think back to 2019. If someone had told you that, you wouldn't go to concerts anymore and everyone would wear a mask and you'd be stuck in your house for months on end with no contact with other people, you'd be like, huh? But now we're 2 years into the pandemic and it's hard to remember, like,
Oh yeah.
That's
I like watch old movies and I see people going into buildings without masks on. And I'm like, oh,
yes.
they just like walk in. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, especially when I wasn't like going before the vaccine, before like I hadn't seen friends in months. I remember I'd watch shows and they just like walk into their friends' houses and I'm like, oh my God. It like looks so scary. I'm like, they're not wearing their masks.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
But that summarizes, I feel like, the experience of being used to being chronically ill. Especially, you and Kyle have more recent onsets of chronic illness. Well, I've always been sick and I didn't realize how sick I was because like
it's all you knew.
This is what I exist in.
Right.
And so when, we talked a little while ago about, I thought I had lupus. I told my doctors in 6th grade, I went tested for lupus. This is what I have. And then my senior year, I finally got diagnosed. Well, at Mayo Clinic, everybody refers everybody to all the patients to all different specialists trying to figure out, what the whole picture is. And they addressed how tired I was. Well, right before I got diagnosed with lupus, I all of a sudden am diagnosed with narcolepsy. I thought how tired I was normal. And that more than the lupus, even though lupus, can cause more damage to your body and, is more likely to be, something that, kills you, I guess. Narcolepsy can't kill you, but I felt like I had been robbed. And that realization that like, oh.
Like it's not normal to be tired all the time. But you have like nothing to compare it to, right? You're not like, oh, well, I used to be like super alert all the time. It's like, oh no, I've just always been like, there wasn't another option. So why would you even consider that? And it's like one of those things you don't even think to say in the appointment. When they're like, are you tired? You're probably like, yeah, a little bit. Like,
I have a thing I call like my like to-do list, my chronic illness worry list. And like, if we knock these things down, then maybe I'll address this. That's like a pretty significant issue on its own, but like these are the priorities.
There's so much above it, right?
Only a chronic illness thing.
Because I'm like, if you zone out, I want like, what are the most important parts that I want you to get, right? I'm like, let me hit the top 3, but there's other stuff. But I'm like, if you zone out, you might not get it.
And I think that's what I like about finding the right doctor. Like you said earlier, like, oh, do you have anything else? And you're like, wow, I actually got through that whole list of, I was only worried about the headaches, but and I think good doctors will ask the right questions. And,
absolutely.
Like in your narcolepsy story where you didn't know you had narcolepsy, but they went that extra step and
ask the right questions.
I mean, that's the same thing I found when I finally found the doctor that I'm with now. Like he came in and a lot of the symptoms, I mean, I didn't always know that they were a symptom of narcolepsy. I was just like, oh, I don't know,
and that's like, saying a lot.
Yeah.
He works with me and I have narcolepsy, so he knew what narcolepsy was.
Yeah, and I think like
but there's so many things that you experience that you don't even realize are part of that, because again, you're just like, oh, it's just like how I feel all the time.
Exactly. And I think it's just like really important to find that like good doctor, I guess, that
totally
will ask those questions and kind of open your mind to think about other things, not just what you think is prevalent. And
totally there's like those green flags of like what you want to look for, and I feel like it's not until a doctor like shows it to you that you're like, it's like, I think we said this last time, it's like being in an abusive relationship, like you're like, I don't even know what I'm looking for because I've never gotten it before, right? So it's like, I don't even necessarily, like in the beginning of my gaslighting thing, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking for because I just know what I don't want. So when they do those things, you're like, okay, I do want a doctor that at the end of my appointment says, did we cover everything? Do you have any questions? Right. For me, I also look for like a doctor that explains everything, because they'll say a term, or like, you know, like especially whenever I go to the dentist, they explain what they're going to do. And I'm like, I have no idea what any of that means. Or if I do a surgery or something, right? I'm like, I want you to explain every step. Like again, at that 8th grade reading level, where, because I'm like, I didn't go to med school. I don't do this all the time. But I think that like when you do stuff over and over again, you forget what it's like to not know it. So I'm like, if a green flag is like if a doctor explains everything to me, you know, like you said, asks, you know, did we cover everything? And I think I told you, like my neurologist gave me a free sample because she knew it would take a while for my insurance. Like there's a green flag, right?
Right.
Not just assuming like, oh, you can wait while the insurance covers it, or, you know, not even assuming like, what if my insurance doesn't cover it? She's not assuming I have good insurance, right? She's like, I want you to get care, whether you can access it or not. So it's like, you got to look for those green flags and be like, okay, this is what I want in the future.
So previously, years ago, I was in an abusive relationship, and something I did that I didn't realize like I carried over to like my chronic illness management is like, before I started dating again, like I was like, because think about it like in the context of like an abusive relationship, you know, like, no, this is it. Like there is no treatment that's better. I think we do the same thing with medical care. Like all doctors are not going to listen to me. All doctors are going to blame me for my symptoms. All doctors are going to, you know, not care about how I'm feeling emotionally, physically, you know, all of those factors. When you're in that situation, especially if you're not, you know, talking about privilege, like if you didn't grow up around a lot of, you know, people that are doctors and comfortable around people that are doctors, or if your doctor is an identity that, you know, intimidates you, or that you had a bad experience with, for example, like I dealt with mean girls a lot growing up, and we talked about same identities. And so I prefer male doctors because I struggle to
who
trust,
makes you comfortable,
finding who, but just like when you're in, you know, like a toxic, maybe not abusive, but toxic relationship, you think this is what I deserve and nothing else exists. And then when you come out of that, you're like, I was so wrong. And it's mind blowing because there are good doctors that want to provide you care, that, you know, that care and want to provide care. And so one thing I did, you know, as I was going to therapy and kind of healing both from, you know, my medical and emotional traumas, when I started like trying to date again, like my therapist went through with me so that I could learn, because you have to learn how to trust yourself again with gaslighting, you know, when you've been told that your symptoms are your fault, that there's nothing wrong with you,
you're being dramatic,
you need to lose weight, whatever the case is,
that would fix everything.
When you're being told that over and over again, you do start to gaslight yourself. And it's so fundamental that you build that trust with yourself, so that when your gut is saying, hey, something's not right here, like this isn't it, you can recognize that. But it takes a process. So I came up with green flags and yellow flags and red flags for dating, but then I didn't realize it at the time, but I did the same thing for my medical providers. And and I think having those, you know, checkpoints, especially if they're more objective, because when you're trying to, you know, navigate gaslighting, it's so important that you know, your brain has been convinced that whatever you're interpreting is incorrect, and that your reality is false. And so when you're making these red, yellow, greens, I think it's really helpful to come up with objectives. So like looking them up online. Okay, I might feel crazy, but I'm probably not crazy if every other person that's reviewing this doctor is saying the same thing. Finding ways to test. And as you have more positive experiences and know what you will put up with and what you won't, and know your worth as a patient,
you like get more and more empowered.
You'll start to trust yourself. But I think, you know, and that was such a big transition. Getting care in Wichita, I searched for answers for 7 years and gaslit the entire time. You're just anxious. You're just going through puberty. You're just whatever the case may be. You're not in enough pain for this. Young people don't get this disease. Being gaslit for 7 years, no one communicating, dealing with a fully broken system, and then having the incredible privilege to go to Mayo Clinic where everything's coordinated. Your first appointment with every doctor is 2 hours long. So to go from that to that, it was insane. And we have a lot of patients that my family has recommended to go to Mayo Clinic. Like, we give our testimony on our experience. And then just in our support groups, we have a lot of people that go to Mayo Clinic. And we talk about it a lot, like how emotional it is. Like, you're happy, you're angry, you're sad, you're stressed, because your eyes are open to, oh my God, I'm not crazy.
Right. People will listen to me. People will validate me. People will understand it.
And when that
but if you don't know anything else, right.
Yeah,
that is why I'm having like this moment where I'm like, I feel like you just told me what I need to talk to my therapist about next week, because I came out of an abusive relationship in high school and I've never thought about how that affects my like medical journey. But I'm like, yeah, of course, because I literally in high school remember being like, I literally would tell myself all the time, I'm like, this is the best I can get. So I'm really lucky. I'm just going to stick it out. This person wants to be with me for the rest of my life. Like, thank goodness, because this is the best it's going to get. And now I look back and I'm like, oh. But it's like the same thing with the doctors. Like, I would leave appointments. And especially when I started to go in by myself without my mom, because again, my mom's Latina and from Brooklyn, New York. So she's the most assertive woman ever. And so when I started going in without her, I'd come out and I'd be like, oh no, I forgot to ask them that. Like, we ran out of time. And she's like, yeah, right. She's like, I'm sorry, what? But I'm like, I'm expecting to make the bare minimum. I'm like, well, the answer like the first couple things. So like, that was good. And it's like, yeah, you're right. I was like gaslighting myself. And so I'm like thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like, okay, I will talk to my therapist about this next week. And because seriously, it's like, if that's all you know.
Yeah.
No, and I feel like it's also important, like you said, that when you like your mom, you came out and you told your mom, like, I think it's also very important to have those people in your life that,
for sure.
You may be an adult, it could be a partner, it could be a friend, and it could be your parents, whoever in your life, but just having somebody that will, not even, either keep you accountable or reality check, and also just like make sure you're going and asking the questions, because we are tired, you're exhausted, some of the things just don't go through your mind, but you
forget some stuff.
And the trauma of it all.
Yeah. And so I think it's always helpful to have that, like, somebody else, like, as a backbone, or just like being there to support you, that will advocate for you, or even if it's just push you, like, hey, make sure you talk about this.
Remember,
so
you talked to them about this.
And I think that's really important,
especially when cognitively, like, dealing with migraines, like, your memory is
absolutely trash. The most my fiance's least favorite thing to do is when we at night we'll pick a movie and we're going through Netflix. I'm like, ooh, this sounds good. She's like, we saw that last week. I'm like, yeah, for sure. And we like keep going through, and there's like a couple movies that I've asked like 4 or 5 times, and she'll be like, and then sometimes I finally remember, because I'm like, oh, I always ask about this one, but my memory is awful. It's so bad. And that's the interesting thing too, is like, migraine is like, I think it's like 90% genetic or something. So I have this special experience of like having migraines from like brain trauma, which luckily I was able to get brain scans. But it's like, so not everyone necessarily is going to have memory issues, but since mine come from concussions, like I'm gonna have memory issues. And it's just like, yeah, I don't remember everything. And it's like when you go to these appointments, you got to write stuff down, and you're gonna, like, when I think back on like the past month, I'm like, okay, well, I've been in pain and I've been this or that, but it's like, you can't remember the little stuff. And that's why it's good to have someone that's like, but remember that one day when like this triggered it, or that, or you felt like this and that wasn't normal. And you're like, oh yeah, because I forget stuff all the time, and it all blends together. Like, just being in pain all the time, it all blends together.
Yeah. And I guess, humble flex, you ran into our own plug again.
Yes.
I guess for the people listening,
we have a quick plug for the app.
Yeah, we recorded this actually 2 days ago, and
I cried a lot.
It got deleted because Zoom didn't want to save the video.
It was the most beautiful interview maybe in the universe.
I was really just thinking, I'm like, wait, I got to make sure that we get the app plug in again.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
It was perfect. It was flawless. It's gone.
Yeah, but it ran it again. And I think that's kind of the whole point of our app is, you know, being able to track those things, you know, even if it's simple and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, writing it down and having it shown to a doctor, I think is always.
Sometimes you don't realize how much it is until you like look back. Like day to
Mhm.
day, you're like, oh, it's not that bad, and then you look
Right.
back.
When you
"Dang,
have that
was
bias
Right.
because you're always feeling crappy.
right. You're like, oh, it's a pretty, you know, normal month for pain or whatever. And then you look back and I'm like, wait, what? Like I had that many headaches. Like I think that's for me, especially too, when I started at like, you know, 10 migraines, 15, 20, and now we're at like, I don't know, I guess 30 a month right now because it's been every day since December. But it's like I didn't notice the change from September to October to November until I looked at it. And especially when you're trying new meds, it's like you got to know, like, okay, I started that new med, like then what changed? But when I like don't track it, and there are some months, like especially when I was starting, because I couldn't find a good app yet, because it was like, okay, if I have a migraine attack, like I don't have the time to write all this stuff down. So now I just have an app where I'm like starting, right? And I'll like go back when it ends, right? And I can just like log the start and end. But it was like before that, I was like, I didn't even have the energy, so I couldn't even like track my symptoms. And you look back and you're like, yeah, I mean, I think it was a regular headache month or something. And it's not until you have those data points that you're like, oh, it is really that bad. And what we talked about last time was like, that's also how you can help yourself, is like the difference of being like, I was in a lot of pain last month, and the difference of being like, I had 10 pain days last month. Like for doctors, I think you've got to hit them with data.
Yeah.
That's how they're
really
trained.
like, that's right. And so it's like you have to meet them in the middle, because it's like if I just come in and I'm like, what can you do for me? Like you're not going to get anything out of your appointment. It's like we're both coming together. So how can I meet them where they're at and they can meet me where I'm at and we can help each other? I think you have to know, like we talked about last time, you know, the system is how it is, and you can either like wallow in it, or you can be like, all right, what can I do to meet this doctor where they're at, and like how can I speak your language and get better care that I want? Because in the end, it's like the best thing for yourself to be able to be like, yeah, my pain days were like out of 10 5 days of the month, and they were at a 9, right? Like then they're like, oh, I actually get it, rather than being like, oh, I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah, and I think having that quantitative data
Exactly.
shows, like, I think it shows the doctor that it is something more, and I think it's harder for doctors to look over that
Right.
data. And I think, which, like, I mean, I know sometimes we like to dog on doctors, but I mean, it is also very hard because chronic illness,
it's not acute. It happens progressively over time.
It progresses, and
Totally.
every single symptom, you know, overlaps with 5, 10, you know, diseases.
Yeah.
And like, you know, as much as I hate looking back, like they were saying, oh, you know, maybe you're just depressed. And it's like, you know, okay, maybe a lot of the symptoms do align. And I think having that data out there can show and, you know, really point out the difference between something being an anxiety or depression to something more severe.
Especially when there's multiple things going on, it's hard to be like, which is this? And we talked about this, and it was like, whenever you get that questionnaire at the office, like, you don't realize how bad it is till you fill out the questionnaire. Because I went in a couple months ago for anxiety medication, and I was like, you know, I've seen a therapist for a while, and I really like her, and she's going to help me long term, but I think I just need like a little extra help right now, like a little crutch, you know? And I was like, I've never asked my doctor for anxiety meds. And I went in, and she's like, okay, fill out this questionnaire. And I was like, okay. And I'm like filling it out, and it's like, you know, asks like, how many days of the past 30 days have you felt like this, whatever. And I'm like, oh, all the time. And I filling out, and I'm like, yeah, no, this is definitely something we're gonna have to figure out this appointment. You know, I go in there like, let's just talk about it. And I was like, yikes, like filling out the questionnaire. It's like when you get those data points, because otherwise, if she's just like, have you felt anxious this past month? I'd be like, yeah. But when she's like, okay, and has that gotten in the way? How many days? It's like, it's those quantitative points that even has to do with self-gaslighting too. It's not even until I hear myself say the quantitative points that I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
And, you know, doctors, I worked in healthcare before doing this, and, you know, everybody's understaffed, everybody's overworked, especially in the pandemic. I do think that everybody wants to provide good care at the root of it. It's just the system's so broken, and I think we have to be optimistic that doctors do want what's best for us. Obviously not accept the care that isn't meeting us where we need. But having, yes, it sucks, be angry about it, be pissed.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, like you're the one that's going to ultimately suffer if you can't,
Right. You got to like help yourself. And it sucks because you can be like, oh, well, I shouldn't have to do work before my appointment to make sure I have a good appointment. But you're like, okay, you can. And then it's not going to be a good appointment.
Right.
Or you can be like, the system sucks, suck it up, do that, and like I said last time, you got to do research too. Cause like, I don't want to I can't go in anymore to my appointments. I'm like, so what should you do? I have no idea any of our, treatment options. I want you to educate me on everything. That's the thing too. If they only have 30 minutes and they've been having appointment after appointment, like I don't want you to spend our whole appointment explaining everything to me. Like, why don't I do some research beforehand, look at all the medications, and then go in like, I think this one sounds best. I have some questions about this. Like, now let's talk. And then you're already like halfway into the conversation. Right. You save yourself time and you get better care. And I feel like it just helps in the long run because then they're like, okay, like I had a doctor tell me like, oh, you seem really committed about your care. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you show them that, then I feel like that also helps, like motivates them a little bit. Like they're really serious about this. So I'm going to be really serious about it.
You know, meeting where they're at.
No,
exactly. Yeah. So it's like, you got to put a little bit of investment into your own care if you want them to invest back.
Well, and, back to, tracking symptoms, and obviously gaslighting is a big issue, not okay. The system's not okay. And it sucks, but it is what it is. We're trying to change it, but it takes small steps with chronic illness, especially like autoimmune diseases. And then when you look at how not chronic illness, my brain is not on. I'm an narcoleptic that got 2 hours of sleep. When you look at how doctors are trained, they need the data. They are looking for labs. They're looking for test results. They're looking for imaging. Well, with so many autoimmune diseases, especially chronic illnesses, things like that, they don't always show up in labs. That's why it took me so long to get diagnosed. My labs didn't show it. But doctors, in order to make a diagnosis, have to have, something. Evidence.
Yeah.
And so when you are documenting things, whether that's a notepad, whether it's using our super cool app, to do that, that is expediting the process. It's giving doctors a clear picture of what's going on. But not only that, it can help you with insurance, getting approved for medications, getting approved for referrals to specialists. Like,
yeah, 100%. I mean, I know
it shouldn't be a full-time job, and I know we're tired, but like it is.
Yeah, and I know because like I had to, before I could get on the medication that hopefully is approved sometime in the next week. Who knows? That was the first medication the doctor wanted to put me on. I was like, oh, sweet, this is awesome. I did all my research, found it out. I really liked it. And then the insurance, 2 weeks later was like, oh no, you have to actually try 3 cheaper medications because, this, and it's like one of those things that you have to, and luckily I have, I'm really happy with the doctor I have, that, it wasn't a hard experience to, fail the medications when they weren't working. Yeah. But I think a lot of them, I think some doctors, it's not just that, oh, I don't feel, sometimes you have to prove that to the doctors. And I think having that documentation as well, it's easier to, I guess, convince, I don't like to use the word convince, but prove that.
Kind of prove your case.
Yeah, prove your case in
and that's another thing. World. Yeah, that's another thing I don't think a lot of people that, able-bodied or don't have to go to doctors a lot realize. Like, there's so many hoops you have to go through. Like, I never knew about, having to fail X amount of drugs to try a new one. And I remember I had just started seeing my neurologist. So I was like, okay, we'll try medicine. And I'd heard from a couple of friends, my fiance's mom, like they were like, Botox has worked great. And I was like, okay, I figure that's like a couple months down the line. Like, we're not just going to start on Botox. Like, I'll probably have to try some meds, whatever. But I remember my doctor told me, she was like, yeah, you have to fail 2 types of medication before you can go to Botox. And it's just like, people don't realize that and they don't tell you that. And then luckily she told me, she's like, we can count Advil and Tylenol as one, like that clearly. So I was like, okay, cool. So I don't have to like really try 2 migraine meds. We can just count that as one. But it's like, I shouldn't have to like prove and like go through these hoops. Cause then it's like, they prescribe one, you like try it for a month, it doesn't work, and then you have to have another appointment, and then you have to prescribe something else, and you have to take that for a month. And it's just like, I don't think people realize, like, it's not as simple as like, I want help, like, let's start it now.
And like, all while trying those meds, you are suffering. Like, your quality of life sucks.
No,
Yeah,
and
I
mean,
would say new meds is just new symptoms. Like, people are like, oh, great. And I'm like, it's just like the nausea's gone, but now this part's back, and then this is back, but that's gone. It's like meds never are a good solution. It's just like, which is the one that, you know, I like the side effects the most and like works. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, in tracking, you know, your data helps with I call it the symptom side effect game. Like, is this a new symptom of my disease, or is this a side effect of the medication? Because then you can look back and figure out
when did it start, you know, when did it end.
Yeah, I don't even realize, honestly. I'm and I won't put that stuff together, right? I'll be like, oh, that symptom started when I stopped that medication. And those are the things too about having somebody that's really great, because I don't realize. And I remember, like, I stopped taking my birth control because I was like, I had been taking it for my cyst, but then now that I'm engaged to a woman, I was like, I don't need it, and I really don't want to be taking it anymore. And then I stopped taking it, and my migraines got really bad, and I didn't even put it together. And then my mom was like, isn't that when you stop taking your birth control? And I'm like, yeah. And that's like why you need to write this stuff down or have someone, because I'm just like, there's so much going on that you like don't remember on a day-to-day basis.
100%.
Yeah.
And then you gaslight yourself, or even other people. Maybe they're like, oh, it hasn't been that bad for you this month. And you're like, let me pull up my app, because don't gaslight me. Like,
Well, and a lot of things I think a lot of people don't understand or don't notice is the fact that I don't think we complain about a lot of the things as much as you'd
as
think.
much as we could.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that kind of goes back to, you know, I think why support groups or having those people that then talking to other people
Social
with
media.
chronic illness is very important. Because if I complained to a normal person how tired I was every time I was tired, that would be half the things I said to them. And, you know, no one wants to talk about that. So you keep it to yourself, but sometimes it's nice just to have that people the validation of, if I tell you I'm tired, you know, this sucks. You know, I'm not like, you know, that I'm not wanting you to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, you're going to be like, yeah, I know that sucks. Yeah, no. And you're going to tell me, oh, your migraines. You're like, no, I know that sucks. Like, you just can't get rid of it, you know? And it's just like having that person that you can, you know what I mean? Even if it's like punching a pillow, that kind of thing, like, it's just something that you can let go and that they understand. Like, it may not be the same thing, but I understand that, you know, it's always there. Or
and like I said, I'm like, I don't need you. It doesn't need to be the same thing. I don't need you to get it. And that's why I can't stand when people are like, I totally understand, unless you like literally have chronic migraine at the same level as me. But when it's somebody else, I'm like, no, it's okay. I don't need you to get it. Like, I don't expect you to, and that's okay. And sometimes I'm like, I don't even want advice. I literally just want to vent. And you're like, yep, that sucks.
And prefacing the conversation is something I like when someone comes to me to talk, like, I'm like, you want solutions or you want a listen? Because
what do you need?
I go in between, like, and I think like learning how to communicate, whether it's with your doctors, with your peers, whether it's your friends, your partner, like, learning to communicate is so essential. And it's all a different language too. It's a mess. I had one thing I wanted to circle back to. Did you like my business talk? Okay, so
per my previous email.
So your experience with you know, an abusive relationship in high school, kind of building your foundation, did you ever have that circle back, like that trauma when you were getting diagnosed? So for me, in my relationship, my chronic illness was weaponized to get me to stay, as like why no one would ever
want to be with you.
And I've talked to some people that have been in similar situations while chronically ill, and it seems like it's something that gets weaponized pretty often when it's an able-bodied person with someone that's disabled. But I wonder, I wanted your take on how kind of that past experience when you weren't chronically ill, how that kind of shaped your experience.
That is actually interesting, because I I have all this internalized ableism of like feeling like a burden. And I think a lot of that's like internalized ableism and trauma, because there's so much of feeling like I'm not good enough, or I'm a burden, or, you know, like kind of like you're so great for wanting to be with me. And like, you know, I'm just going to do so much for you, all that kind of stuff. And so I've been really lucky to have such a supportive partner when I became disabled, because I wasn't disabled. Well, I mean, I was getting headaches, but I wasn't as severely disabled as I am now when we met. And I didn't even know that they were migraines when we met. So, and I was at the point where I'm like, doesn't everyone wake up with a headache?
They were your little cute morning headache.
They were my cute morning headaches at the time. So I had to have a conversation like a couple weeks ago and sit down and just really recognize, like, I want to recognize that, like, not that it's like this great thing that you're with me, but like, this isn't what you signed up for. This isn't who I was when we met. And you've just like rode along and been cool with it. And it's like, it's come on progressively. And so we've worked on, and I'm like, I'm learning it as I'm with you and as you're learning it. And it's just been those moments where I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm such a burden. And she'll be like, you're not. And it's those hard moments of being like, okay, I am worthy of someone taking care of me. Cause it's like, if she makes dinner for me like 3 nights in a row, then I'm like, oh, you know, it's a bad pain day, but I got to make up for it now. And it's like, no, you don't ever have to make up for it. And you don't ever owe me anything. And I think that's like this very like
letting go of that transaction.
Yeah, I was just gonna say my old relationship used to be very transactional, and it's like we have to be at the same, and just realizing that like you can meet your partner in other ways, and it's just like that feeling of like, and I have to remember all the time, I'm like, okay, if she were in this position, I would do it, like I would take care of her, you know what I mean? But letting go and like letting yourself not feel like a burden and being like, this person wants to be with me for me, and you know, in sickness and in health and everything. It's so hard to unlearn being a burden, because it's like trauma of a relationship and that internalized ableism and society telling us like we are a burden.
Right.
Like those two things.
Doctors telling us we're a burden.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, oh, it's the worst. And I tell her this all the time. I'm like, oh, it sucks. Like I can't get up and do stuff with you on the weekend. She's like, I just want to hang out with you. She's like, what do I like if I go out with other people? I'm gonna want to be at home with you because like you're the person I want to be with. It doesn't matter what we're doing. But it's hard to unlearn that.
Right.
I'm like having all these realizations of the connection of that, and I'm like,
I've found through conversations that past like traumatic relationships, whether it's a partner, a parent, friend, has a lot of impact on the care that they seek out and the care that they accept. And I think it's just so interesting. And once you recognize that pattern, you can start to change it. You know, when you're not aware of it, it's not something that
like what you said about retrusting your gut, that's the hardest thing, because I feel like you're like, oh, I failed myself in the past, you know, I didn't notice the signs, I didn't get out, like I didn't trust my gut. And so then it's like having to trust your gut now and like trust your body. It's so hard, because I'm like,
especially when your body's failing you also.
Yeah.
Systems failing you and your body.
Yes, because I feel like being in an abusive relationship and having disability, it's like the way I look at my body is like you have to like relearn to love your body as a disabled person. And I feel like I have to have that moment where I'm like, yeah, I can be really hard on her and be like, oh, I'm in pain all the time, but I'm like, you've also like brought me to this point, you've carried me through so much, like having to relearn that, especially like being disabled and being like, I still love you even though, you know, I don't know what's going on up here.
And that gratitude for how far, and again, like
how far you come.
It is a-okay to be so angry. But also, you know, when you have a good day, like I find it really helpful to look back and be like, 4 years ago, I wasn't able to walk and talk. Now I'm angry because I had to take a nap today. Like, and like realizing and thanking your body for like how far you've I couldn't separate like the feelings of like, I love who I am as a person and who I'm becoming. I accept my disability and chronic illness, but I'm also angry about it. Like so many different emotions. And it's so hard when you are, I feel like we both hate this word, but like when you're fighting a battle against yourself, like it's such a man versus self experience. And then when you have these external forces of medical gaslighting and
self-gaslighting,
barriers to care, things like that, like it's so hard to just start to feel okay in your own skin even when you're in pain, even when you're anxious, like just like settle into it. And that's something obviously
And I
a
feel
work
like,
in progress, but
yeah, and I feel like it's just like starting simple. I think, I mean, a lot of things in life, I think a lot of you have to just start small. I think people want to make this huge change of, even, I mean, especially with gaslighting, like, it's not like one day you're just going to be like, oh, this is fine. Like, it's going to be the small steps of, okay, I recognize this. How can I, make it like a priority to just focus on one little thing? Like, okay, even if it's just saying it out loud, like, I'm not crazy or whatever it
Yep.
may be. And just starting it slow and every day working on it instead of, just one day you're going to just stop gaslighting
Right.
yourself, or you're
Right.
just gonna randomly one day love yourself. Yeah. And I think it's just one of those things. And that's with everything. I mean, diets, working out, anything in life. And I think it's just important to like slow down, be like, okay, how can I take this one step at a time and get to the point of where I want to be instead of trying to do it all at once.
Especially when you're in survival mode, it's so hard to like even get your brain to let you pause.
That part. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like especially in the disabled community, it's like I'm not gonna make it unless I make tiny steps. And I feel like I'm like people are always like, oh, like, is this new medication cured migraine? And I'm like, no, but it's like nothing will. But I'm like, I have less, like I have the same amount of migraine attacks, but the pain's a little bit better, right? It's like, okay, small step. But I feel like whenever I talk to a lot of able-bodied folks, it's like they want these big steps, like get a job and do this. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take these little steps and we're gonna get there eventually. And that's still good. Even if I see all my friends taking these giant steps, right? Like I can't compare myself and gaslight myself and just like I'm on my own path and I'm doing my own thing and I gotta take those little steps.
No, and I think
celebrate them.
Yeah, I think celebrating and like taking it slow. But I also think sometimes when you try to make those big jumps, you aren't ready, and then you end up falling farther back than you were. And I think I mean,
who, me?
Especially with being like, because if you do push too hard, you're gonna get sick. Is it worth working that extra hour to get sick next week and not be able to work a day?
Right.
You just lost 8 hours when you could have just went home or go and take that nap.
I feel attacked.
I know, like just at me next time.
No, and I understand that I do the same thing, and it's like I want to push myself to, be better, do great things, all that kind of things. But I think sometimes
push and pull.
You have to know yourself enough to know when you should stop and, when you need a break and all that kind of stuff.
My go-to is like, I'm going to work out and get my shit together. And so I'll be like, okay, well, last time before I flared, I was working out an hour and a half doing heavy weights at this and doing it 4 days a week. And that was great. And I loved it. And then I'll try to do that, like replicate it. And then I flare even worse. It's like it's okay to do 20 minutes of walking.
Yep.
Like that's better than nothing.
Yep. And that's the gaslight yourself. Yeah, because you're like, oh, well, I need to do this and I need to do that. And it's just like, and I think it's like, it comes from like, if you've been gaslit or gaslit yourself for a while, it's like hard to unlearn that because you're like, oh, well, it's not that bad. I'm being dramatic. Like, I need to get out today and I need, and sometimes I'll be so hard on myself. I'm like, I didn't get out for a walk today. Like, I'm so lazy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I was in pain and I couldn't even make it to the kitchen. Well, of course I wasn't going to make it out for a walk, but it's like, I need to not gaslight myself and be like, it's okay, we're working on it and you got stuff in place. And I think that's the hard thing too, is people a lot of times, especially that don't have migraine, just think I'm just like sit and do nothing. They're like, okay, well, have you seen this? Have you done that? And I'm like, I did an injection a month ago. Now we're going to have to wait like 3 to 4 months to really see it. Like, well, have you done this? Have you tried that? And I'm like, you just gotta wait.
Take it one thing at a time.
Well, and like the self-gaslighting can be so like, Maddie, you're just a lazy piece of shit. And Maddie, you could have pushed yourself more today. Maddie, you're making excuses because that's just something you don't really want to do. And then your friends get on, like, I feel like people can see the cracks that you lay out. And, then when someone's like, well, I really was counting on you today to be at work. well,
Ooh. Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, now the gaslighting just got a lot worse. And I think it's
Yep.
just such a compounded problem.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, and I don't think people do it on purpose either. I mean, it's just like a natural thing of
Right, because we naturally gaslight ourselves.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, I really wanted to hang, you really want to hang out with a friend, but oh, you're having headaches. Like, yeah, I was excited to hang out with you. Like,
Headaches.
yeah. No, whatever. And I mean, even for yourself, and I mean, friends are like, oh, well, I just really wanted to hang out with you. I wish you didn't, you weren't tired and wanted to stay in. And I think
Yeah,
it's
same.
not,
I also
it's
wish
not on,
that.
yeah, no, it's not on purpose, but I think, you know what I'm saying? I think it's
Yeah.
sometimes.
They think they're communicating to you, hey, I value your friendship.
Yeah, and I think
Right.
it's sometimes.
And
it's
you're
hard.
taking it as, I'm letting you down and there's nothing I can do about it. Like there's just that communication disconnect.
Oh yeah, I convince myself weekly that like all my friends hate me, everyone, I'm like, oh, everybody hates me. Especially if I'm like have a bad flare and I like don't reach out to people, I'm like, well, none of them want to be my friend anymore. And they all hate me and I'm the worst. And then they're like, hey, how have you been? I'm like, what?
I exist.
Again, thinking I'm a burden and like gaslighting myself and being like, oh, I don't deserve friends that are patient and understanding. That's what I love about working with the disabled community. Because I'm like even myself, when we were supposed to re-record this yesterday and I woke up with a bad migraine and I'm like, oh, I can just push through. And I'm like, no, they're going to understand it though. Like, because if
Right.
you messaged me and was like, I have a flare day, like we need to push, I'd be like, yeah, of course. So that's what I love about the disabled community. I always get so nervous being like, I need to push this. Or like, I can do this, but I'm going to be camera off in my bed or whatever. And I get so nervous and they're like, yeah, of course. And you're like, oh yeah. Cause if roles
can
were reversed, I
breathe.
would feel the same way. Yeah.
No, and I think it's moments like that. And like, as we work more and more exclusively with like the disabled community, like for example, our app development team, has quite a few people that are chronically ill. So
that's
like
awesome.
we have, and as we expand, like we intend on being founded and ran by the majority of people with chronic illness or disabilities. And I remember when I first started working with our dude Paul, what is he?
Dr. Paul
Pelican. Subtle plug, but like I remember like having our first meeting and being so anxious, and I ended up having an anxiety attack about everything, and I was like making up some excuse, and I'm like, now he's never going to want to work with me, and he's going to think I'm super unprofessional. But the fact that like we are surrounded now by not only like people in the chronic illness community that we do support groups and stuff with, and like people that we meet like you, but like so much of like our dev team, our interns, they have chronic illness too, and like we're just getting more and more like immersed in the community. And it's like, yeah, no, I'm not really gonna play with the able-bodied rules anymore. Like,
yep. Yeah, it's the patriarchy and the grind culture, like that we always have to be on, and this idea that like we're not good unless we're productive and we did something. Like, no, if you laid in bed all day, cool, whatever, you did what you could.
And like it's such a relief not having that guilt, like with you and your migraine. I could tell that you were like, you felt bad about it, and I'm always like overbearing with it. I'm like, no, I totally because like it's so rare that people understand, like like I didn't get sleep last night. We had a meeting at 10 a.m. that I was running late for because like I overslept. I was drugged out of my mind, like my meds messed up, like it wasn't my fault, but I was meeting with someone like that just doesn't get it. And so there's so much anxiety, whereas like when you are surrounded by people that get it, life is just easier.
So nice. Yeah, seriously, because you just like, I just feel like this grind culture just doesn't work for me, and I'm like, we don't have to, if we push it, whenever it gets done, and I feel like it has to do with all the gaslighting. And just like the more and more you get in that community, the more you realize, okay, like I do deserve that grace and that space and the patience, and like people will meet me where I'm at. Right. And people will meet me where I'm at, like when I can meet them where I'm at,
And that's not to say that like, I think people associate, grind culture with overachieving. We're very productive. Like we work really hard. We get a lot done. We work quicker than people sometimes without chronic illness, but we're flexible. And like,
Totally.
just because like you reject the whole grind culture doesn't mean you can't do great things. It means that you're also a human.
Right. And I'm just going to get that work done in a different way. And that's what I like about working from home so much, is I always tell my sister, I'm like, okay, this project, I could probably do it from 8 to 10 in the morning and be done, or I can like do 30 minutes and then rest, and then do 30 minutes and rest. Or it's like, maybe I finally have energy at the end of the day when I'm watching my shows and it's 8 p.m. and everyone's like offline, but I was asleep during the day. So now I'm going to catch up.
Right.
And just that flexibility of like, it doesn't have to be the 9 to 5, like grind, you know,
moving things for physical therapy or doctor's, like I forgot how like stressful it was trying to schedule physical therapy. Because
yeah, I know, because especially as I work from home, I had this thought, especially as I got more disabled and had to make more appointments. I'm like, how do people make appointments if you're only open between 9 to 5 and I only have a certain amount of sick hours or days or appointment hours that, you know what I mean? Like, how do I fit all this in? And
even when you do have those sick days, whatever, like you're still frowned upon half the time.
Right.
Like there's so many different directions that we could go on forever because so much is broken. But I think we covered a lot of ground. I want, in closing, I want to get your 5, we call this segment
just the tips.
I love that. Just the tip.
Because we are 5 years old and we think everything should be at that
point.
Like
I say it in Spanish all the time. I'm like, solo la puntita.
So this is our just the tips segment. The hands on the hips. What are your 5 tips for of dealing with, avoiding, trusting yourself, anything medical gaslighting?
Medical gaslighting.
Yeah. All gaslighting. I would definitely say the first thing is like write everything down. So like we just talked about, like I feel like when I get into an appointment, I forget a lot. And then if I'm getting gaslit, then it all goes away and I'm going to forget everything. And I'm going to be driving home and be like, oh, I forgot to bring that one thing up. It's just like hard to remember in the moment. It's like giving a presentation or doing public speaking, like some of it's going to go away. Right. So definitely like writing everything down. And I always write down like, what are my goals? Like, I don't want to leave this appointment until this gets addressed. And so I make sure that I, have that out. And if the doctor sees you like this, they know like, all right, we got some stuff to handle. Like they know you're going to tackle your goals. I would say definitely research. Like it's so important to come in there with a general knowledge, because I feel like if I go in and I'm like, oh, what medications should I try? Then like they can answer some questions. But if I go in and I already know what I want and I now can ask those deeper questions of like, okay, so I see that this is one of my options, but I don't like this symptom, right? It's like if I had just gone in there, I would have been getting an overview of everything, but that way I can have a more in-depth conversation with you rather than being like, what are my options? I can be like, okay, I looked at Botox, but I don't like this side effect. So can we talk about that? Then you just get more out of your appointment. I would say for sure it goes along with writing it all down, but having the data. So, download the app. When's the app coming out?
Hopefully end of January, beginning of February.
Okay, so download the app, but you definitely want data because the quantitative points, even for myself, that helps with medical gaslighting and self-gaslighting, because you don't realize, I think the interesting thing with men and women, it's like for men, maybe you don't realize like, oh, it is pretty bad. Like I've been telling myself like, don't be so weak, but it is really bad. And then for women, you're saying like, oh, I'm not being dramatic. Like it is really this bad, right? So it's like for both men and women, we gaslight ourselves like men have to be tough and it's not that bad. And for women, I'm like, oh, I'm strong, it's fine. But when you have those data points, that all goes out the window and you're like, this is quantitatively like how much I've had, how much pain I've been in. Having that support system too, for sure. And having people to hold you accountable. Because sometimes I don't have the energy and I need someone to push me to be like, make the phone call today or make it for me, and I think sometimes it's like we feel like we can't lean on people, and it's like you got to learn how to, and my partner and I dealt with that. We've had to have conversations where like, how can I do it in a healthy way? Like I'm not saying like at the end of the day, like if I had to do this by myself, I could do it. It would be hard, but at the end of the day, I could do this by myself, but I don't have to do it by myself. So I'm gonna lean on you a little bit because I have that option, right?
All goes back to that burden.
Yeah, that's the theme. And then I think the last thing would just be generally finding somebody that makes you comfortable. So like you said, if that's somebody without certain identities or if that's someone with certain identities, whatever makes you feel comfortable. And you have to like kind of sit down with yourself and be like, what makes me comfortable and what doesn't. And that's what I did when I was looking for a therapist too. It's like, do you want a man or a woman? Do you want them to specialize in this? You know, like, I know for my mom, you know, she speaks Spanish. So I'm like, maybe she'd feel more comfortable having someone bilingual, like whatever it is, if it's, you want somebody with the same identities, it's just, and so that's what it is for me. Like, I'd love having my woman of color doctor just because I feel like she understands it. And I feel like I love doctors that admit on being a woman. So I'm like, you get what it's like to feel like, oh, you're being dramatic, or, oh, it's downplayed, whatever it is. Or if you have issues with women, you want a man, whatever it is, just knowing for yourself. Because it's like, if I don't sit down and really think about it, and then I go in there and I get triggered by who it is, it's like, well, I need to sit down with myself and know, or else I'm doing myself a disservice. So I feel like a lot of this stuff, it feels like,
and spending money.
Yeah. And so I feel like a lot of these things, you feel like, oh, it sucks, I shouldn't have to do this, I shouldn't have to put in so much effort to research someone, or to, it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, the system's how the system is, and you're just going to do yourself a disservice if you don't do the research, have everything written down. Like, this is how you can make the best out of the shitty system.
Yeah. And going back to your like what identities and what resonates with you with a doctor, I've also found, like, for some things, I like doctors that hold me accountable. Like, Maddie, have you been doing what you're supposed to, like, that call me out? And for other things, like, I want them to be very gentle. Like, and like, when I was looking for a therapist, the same thing. Like, at first I thought I wanted someone that was going to give me homework, like, let's get this done. And then, like, I realized I don't like that. I need it to be a very, like, let's just talk. And I've seen that pattern carry over to doctors too, because doctors have different personalities. They have different ways of treating you, and
yeah,
you know, holding you accountable is good in some regards, and challenging patients is good in some regards, and sometimes, like, it's not it.
Yeah. And I like what you said earlier about the green, red, and yellow flags, and just like noticing. I think as soon as you have a good doctor, really noticing, like, what is it that I like about them, and looking at what you want going forward. Because it's so easy to be like, well, I don't want that and I don't want that, but well, then what do I want? And so noticing, like you said, like, oh, he asked at the end of my appointment, do I have any questions? Okay, that's something I liked. And it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship, you're like, I didn't even know what was possible. So it's like, you don't even think, because when I think of a good doctor, I'm like, I guess they just help me. But you don't think, oh, I want them to ask questions, I want them to say this. You don't realize until it happens.
Break things down.
Yeah.
I like my doctors. I liked my doctors to go into the science behind what's going on. Like, at the dentist, hate the dentist. I would rather have a colonoscopy than go to the dentist. Not kidding. Including the prep. Like, I will shit my pants rather than go to the dentist.
Yep.
And I need my dentist to, like, walk through what they're doing while they're doing it. And same with, like, procedures, like, where you're not put out. Like, I need you to communicate. And so now I know that, and I don't even look for doctors that do it. I demand it. I'm like, here's what works for me, so I'm going to need you to do that. And if it's not happening, time out.
Right.
Let's revisit the notes.
This
is my work.
It's like dating. You have to find, like, if they have to work for you and you have to work for them, you know. And it's okay if a doctor isn't a great fit, and it can go both ways. And it's like, you know, that's the same thing with a therapist. That's like my worst fear, is having a therapist and then it doesn't work out, and then I have to find a new one. And then, but it's like, you got to find who fits you best.
Yeah. And I have had doctors that I've had negative experiences with, that I'm going to pretend like it was me that brought up my issues, but it was definitely my mom. Where, like, we addressed, like, I don't like how you're speaking to me. I feel like you're blowing me off. Listing the things that you have a problem with. That's an option, because they also sometimes turn into a completely different provider. Like, it's okay to stand up for yourself. I think, you know, there's always this doctor patient, like, no, they're people. That's
a really good reminder.
humble ourselves.
I've never done that, but now I'm like, yeah, you're right, we can do that.
It's hard, and you got to hype yourself up. It's not a beginner skill. it's like an intermediate to advanced skill.
That's our 6th tip. You gotta hype yourself up. I forgot that one from our last recording. You gotta hype yourself up because it's hard, and you get in there and you're like, and then they start gaslighting you, and you get even smaller and smaller and smaller by the second. So you gotta go in and be like,
Gator needs a scat, you punk ass bitch.
You know, in the mirror, like, I'm a bad bitch. You're gonna do it. You're not gonna let them gaslight you. You know, it's like those like silly things that they say you do where you like hit a power pose. You like put on that one song. But I'm like, if you've been gaslit for years, you know, you might have to do it. Like, it seems silly, but you're like, no, it's really hard to like go in and hype yourself up. Like, you know, put your best like playlists on, you know, before you go in, like the Rocky fight. You gotta hype yourself up.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. I'm glad we got to do it again because we talked about completely different things, I guess.
Yeah, you can tell your therapist we did a different format.
I will. She's gonna be so proud. Brooke and I, we're besties. She says I'm not allowed to say that. That it's an insult to the industry. She's like, I have a lot more training than friends. I'm like, but I still want to drink wine with you.
Cut it out for
We'll cut it out. Brooke would love that.
I'll cut it out and then I'll send it to you.
We can send it to Brooke. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. I look forward to interviewing you on all the other topics that we could dive into.